In our current implementation, we have some duplication. For each input field, we should have this div with the class form group, as well as a label and an input field. And you can see some values are repeated here. For example, what we have for the HTML4 attribute of the label, that is username, is exactly the same for the ID and name attributes of the input. Do you see the pattern here? We have repeated the same pattern for the password field. So that's a good time to extract this markup and put it into a reusable component. So here in the common folder, let's add a new file, call it input.jsx. We import React on the top. And because we don't need state here, because we're working with a controlled component, we can create a functional component. We call this input, which takes props. Now we need to go back to our login form. Select this container div along with the label and the input, cut, and then paste it into our new component. All right, now let's make the necessary changes. So we have this username in 3 places. We want to replace all these with props.name. So that's the name of our input field. Or we can make this code better by destructuring this argument. So let's remove that, destructure it, and pick the name property. Now, wherever we have props.name, we can just use name. Isn't that better? Next, we need to replace this username with something we get from our props object. Let's call that label. So here we pick label as well. Save the changes. Good. We got a couple more changes to make. Here's one, account.username. We want to replace this with the value property of the props object. So one more time, let's add the value here. And finally, onChange. Again, we want to replace this with something from the props object. We call that onChange. So finally, let's add that here. So this is the interface of our input component. Now back to our login form. On the top, let's import this input component from current folder /common/input. Now back to our form. This is where we had our username field. We're going to replace this with input. Now we should set its props. So name should be username. Value should be account.username. Label should be username with a capital U. And onChange should be this that handle change. Save the changes. So this is the end result. You can see using this input is easier than this div with a label and input. So let's get rid of the password field as well. Instead, I'm going to duplicate this input, change the name to password, value to account.password, label to password with a capital P, and we leave onChange as is. With this change, our form is much easier to read and understand. We are not distracted by all those bootstrap classes.